All right, this is episode 8 of Sunday School with Ron. Today we'll finish chapter 2 of the book of Hebrews, and that will be verses 10 through 18. For it became him for whom are all things, and by whom are all things, in bringing many sons unto glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through suffering, or complete through suffering. For both he that sanctifieth and they who were sanctified are all of one, for which cause he is not ashamed to call them brethren, saying, I will declare thy name unto my brethren. In the midst of the church will I sing unto thee. And again I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children which God hath given me. For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver them who through fear of death all their lifetime subject to bondage. For verily he took not on him the nature of angels, but he took on him the seed of Abraham. Wherefore, in all things it behooved him to be made like unto his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people. For in that he himself has suffered being tempted, he is able to succor or save them that are tempted. This part is about his high priestly perfection through suffering. Um, Everybody I've read regarding verses 10 through 18 of this chapter focus on the solidarity of the Son with the human family. It's a big deal. Um, he experienced suffering and death because you experience suffering and death. Um, in verse 9, the writer had mentioned Jesus' death for the first time. Now he affirmed that such suffering was appropriate for Jesus, as he is the captain of many sons. He's the head of many sons. Um, since his brethren must suffer, since we must suffer, he must also suffer. We need a captain that can empathize with us. The Son of Man is not the only one God intends to glorify. All of his sons, that is, believers, can expect glorification. Him in this passage is God the Father. Some translations may have author in place of captain, that is, he's the author of salvation. This is, of course, Jesus. God perfected Jesus by charting his path to glory through suffering. He does the same for us. We must go through suffering before we get to glory. By having experienced suffering, Jesus can more perfectly help us. To perfect is another word, favorite word of the author, who used it he used it 9 times throughout the book. Um, let's see what I want to hit on here. Not ashamed. There's great solidarity between Jesus and the believers. The Old Testament taught this solidarity in Psalm 22 and verse 22, which he's quoting in verse 12 here. Verses 13 and 14, this quotation is from Isaiah chapter 8, verses 17 through 18, and illustrates that Jesus will not turn away from identifying with the people of God. The emphasis in the first quote is on the character of Jesus and the character that Jesus and believers share. Hagner says this: the divine intention to lead human beings to the goal for which they have been created appeared to be mocked by the human experience, meaning that we die. It was entirely congruous that God should graciously decree that his Son identify himself with the human condition and rescue humanity through his own humiliation and death. The sufferings of Jesus were appropriate to the goal and obtained and were experienced in accordance with God's fixed purpose. Because the author has previously talked about dominion and rulership, the goal may be related to Genesis when mankind was given authority over creation. That is, we were given authority over creation, and all of these great and glorious things were meant for us to were meant for us to rule over. Yet we died. So God's fixed purpose is to lead many children to glory, or many sons, and the future glorification of many sons is secured in the present glorification enjoyed by Jesus in this exaltation. Um, Verses 14 through 15. These children, however, were once held in servitude by their enemy, Satan. Since they were human, their captain had to become human and die for them in order to rescue them. But by doing so, he was able to destroy the devil. The author did not mean that Satan ceased to exist or to be active. Rather, the word he used was destroy, in the Greek, indicates the annulment of his power. So, in speaking of the devil as wielding the power of death, the writer meant that Satan uses people's fear of death to enslave them, and fearing death. All right? This tracks with other comments that I've read on a personal note and in a very little sense of the phrase. I know people who are afraid of dying. They can't necessarily give an answer to why, but it causes them great anxiety, nervous breakdowns, and it puts some of them in therapy. I think some of this is called, and I know this is kind of a buzzword or not necessarily a legitimate diagnosis, but I think you would use the term existential dread. Also consider having tempted humanity to sin, the devil acts as the accuser. There from Revelation chapter 12 and verse 10, demanding that a just punishment be exacted. It's ironic that human beings destined to rule over creation should find themselves in the posture of a slave in fear of death. But Christ has delivered us from the penalty of death. All right, we'll stop there and we'll pick up again in chapter 3.